during that time, I did in railway systems engineering integration with the University of Birmingham. And before that, I studied civil engineering. I've studied automation and control engineering, mechanical engineering. I'm an aircraft engineering technician. So I come from an engineering background. I did mechanical engineering back in the early 90s. So and I've worked in the semiconductor industry. I've worked in the lift industry. I've worked doing aircraft maintenance, heavy checks, and I've worked then in the pharmaceutical industry, maintaining machines. So it's all totally related to engineering. And I've seen a lot of close calls, as they call it, in my day, from accidents and near misses and all that stuff. So and there was probably no human factors around at the time to look at these things. So my main work today is during my time in the Commissioner for Railway Regulation, we audit railway organisations in Ireland, and we do they have safety management systems. So we check that they produce these procedures to say how they're going to manage their safety in a safe way, and then we come along and audit them to check they're implementing their procedures. So I did a big part of my research on that, and I'm going to present that paper today. But I'm also going to look at the new regulations for human factors, which are only just starting to come into Ireland, and we're only starting to check the organisations that they're compliant with them, and that only started in 2020. So the human factors area is very new to the railway industry in Ireland. And as well as that, just to add, like the Lewis tram, they come under our organisation as well. So we audit the Lewis organisation, and we audit mainly Irish Rail, and we audit Heritage Rails, because they come under our remit as well.
Okay. Thank you very much, Shane. So according to the agenda, so we can actually start with your presentation, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, that's fine.
So I will stop sharing my screen, and maybe you can start sharing yours.
Yeah. Okay.
I hope everyone can see Shane's presentation. Please let us know in the chat for people that are joining us online.
Okay.
And if you have any questions, just type it on the chat, or you can ask at the end of the presentations as well. So,
okay.
So yeah.
You sit where you were, we can see. Oh, there.
Yeah.
We can see them.
Oh, is that okay now?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Great, thanks.
So Shane, the floor is yours.
Right, thank you very much. Okay, so this presentation is about the new requirements for human and organizational factors to be included as part of a railway organization's safety management system that the National Safety Authority for Railways will assess and supervise. So yeah, okay, so sorry, my introduction then. The first part will be talking about my research paper, which was a review of the NSA supervision activities and audit outcomes to enhance the monitoring of a railway organization's safety management system. And then the second part will be about the new requirements for human and organizational factors to be part of a railway organization's safety management system. And so this is the research paper was broken down. I'll give you some background on the National Safety Authority on railway legislation, the problem that I had, and the research approach. I talk about the aim and objectives of the research, the findings and the main findings and recommendations. So the background to people who don't know, the National Safety Authority, every European member state has a National Safety Authority. These were established under European directives in 2004. The Commission for Railway Regulation is the National Safety Authority in Ireland. Our role is safety oversight, and we produce guidelines for the railway organisations to operate. The railway organisations, we call them like heavy rail, would be passenger and freight trains. Light rail would be like the Lewis. If they build a metro, that will come under us as well. There's heritage railway services in Ireland. There's about 7 or 8 of them, and they operate around the country, and they're all on little independent railways. Each railway organisation provides a safety management system document, and this is a huge suite of documents of procedures, how we do things in a safe way, and then these are assessed against the common safety method regulations. They came out in 2018, but this study involved the regulations from 2010. Because the period of time that was when I analysed the organisations was from 2012 to 2019. And then these safety management system documents that an organisation produces, they're assessed against the, as I say, the common safety methods, we call them the CSMs, the technical specification of interoperability regulations and national rules. And then if we're satisfied, the CR issues a safety certification authorization. And then after certification authorization, the CR supervision team then audits the organisation, and then we then do these audit activities, and then we produce findings and outcomes, as typically, so you would call them probably recommendations, but we call them outcomes, which the railway organisation must address. And then an audit outcome in the contents of this research was either non-compliance or an action required, because they were considered the weaknesses in the safety management system. So the safety regulation, just to give you a brief overview, there's European legislation. This is railway safety directives. The 2016 is the last one. The previous one was 2004. And this sets out the NSA role in each member state. It defines an infrastructure manager, a railway undertaking, organizations, and what should be in an SMS in the actual document. And then there's technical specifications for interoperability, and these define the technical and operation standards which must be met by railway organizations, because you're especially in Europe, when you're running cross-border services, you have to make sure everything can run smoothly and there's no stopping trains at borders. So at the moment, there is a lot of trains stopped at borders between countries. You wouldn't think it, even though we are living in the European Union, but trains can be held up for hours at border posts currently, and because some silly little rules from one country going to the next country, and you could involve local policemen, you know, and there's all sorts of stuff that goes on. You wouldn't believe it until you hear about it. And then we have national legislation in Ireland, and these are the Railway Safety Act 2005 that established my organisation after the Railway Safety Directive in 2004 came out, and then there was statutory instruments 476 of 2020 that transposed the 2016 Railway Safety Directive into national law. And then that came out and the most important bit was the human factors bit. There's a new SMS requirement, and it says there shall be a clear commitment to consistently apply human factors knowledge and methods. Now, when industry gets these words are put into these regulations, like what does that mean to a railway organisation? A clear commitment to human factors. So they typically don't have a clue about human factors, and they then will have to rely on experts in human factors to tell them exactly what they need to do. So there's a huge knowledge gap there that needs to be developed for the railway sector. And in Ireland, it's only starting to develop it. So the problem with this, so going back to this research, in 2018 legislation, the NSA is required to analyse its audit outcomes and develop a risk-based approach to supervision. And the main problem was that the NSA didn't have a formal methodology to do this. So the task hadn't been undertaken previously due to not being a priority, and time, resources in a small NSA to undertake such work is an issue. There's only about 15 staff. That's all we have. So we are like, and half the staff would be railway inspectors, which go out. So you're only talking 7 or 8 people for the size of our country to inspect these organisations. And then the motivation was work. The study was motivated by the legislation changes in 2018. The impact it'll have on our organisation, and new competences will be required. The study will assist and benefit the NSA in identifying potential shortcomings associated with the SMS for regulatory organization, and the work should enhance the monitoring of regulatory organizations' SMS by the NSA by making recommendations on how to achieve this. So the research approach was to provide an overview of the implementation of the NSA supervision activities with the introduction of the 2018 Common Safety Methods, to look into a broadly accepted approach to measure and indicate if an SMS is effective, and to review current practices linking SMS with safety culture. Safety culture is another whole area that had to be introduced with a safety management system, and a lot of organizations just wouldn't have a clue what to do when it comes to safety culture. So you need to get experts in to understand what to do. And then the data analysis I mentioned before, this was to look at audit reports that we've audited, and I had to devise a methodology to do this data analysis. And I looked at over 500 NSA audit outcomes. So in that period of 2012 to 2019, we produced about 500 audit outcomes. And all these outcomes are generally to improve the organization's safety management system, or we highlight stuff that they said they were going to do and they didn't do it. You know, and that typically is what happens. They produce a procedure and say, we're going to do this, 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 and this. And then you come along to check and they haven't done it. So, you know, they've only done maybe half it or something. They haven't implemented it all. So, as I say, so I had to undertake, when I did this analysis, I had to do, you have to have a good knowledge of the CSM criteria when you're trying to assign every outcome to a CSM criteria. And then you need good judgment and consistency in approach. So this is, to give you an idea, it's a safety management system document contents. You can see it, these came out in 2010, these regulations. So for a railway undertaking, as we call them, that would be the railway operator. They have to meet the criteria going from A to S. So you can see there's risk management, maintenance, contractor, and these are just the high level sections. And then if you're an infrastructure manager, you have to meet all those requirements from A to W. So, and then typically, so for example, take risk management. This is the actual extract from the regulation. Risk management would have 5 subsections that they have to meet. So they have the procedures for this, procedures to identify risks, procedures to develop and put in place risk control measures, all this stuff. A lot of it is about risk assessment. And and then this, just to give you an idea, is the European Safety Management System wheel. So this is what this shows where all the regulations come, how they fit into place. And you have all the different sections of the safety management system, and that was produced in 2012. So now just back to the aim of this research was to provide recommendations to enhance the NSA's planning process for monitoring and railway organizations' SMS. And the objectives were to provide an overview of the impact on supervision activities with the introduction of the common safety methods, and to identify a broadly accepted approach to measure and indicate if an SMS is effective, and to review current practices and studies linking SMS with safety culture, and to undertake a data analysis of the NSA audit outcomes. So my main findings with the first one was that the recent 2018 legislation has additional mandatory requirements to take account of, evaluating SMS effectiveness by the NSA, safety culture, and human organization factors in a railway organization's SMS. And the impact on a small NSA is how to manage its additional duties. It requires us to have a new strategy and plan to be devised, as resources are limited with these additional workload. The NSA must develop a risk-based planning approach, which means we have to change our current approach. It's going to take time to develop new staff competencies. If we choose the European Railway Management Maturity Model and European and the Safety Culture Model, they are models produced by ERA, which is the European Railway Agency, which is a central European body. And the NSA may need to produce guidelines for the rail sector for any new decision-making criteria. So from the literature research to evaluate the effectiveness of an SMS, there's different views going around the world with this. Evaluating SMS effectiveness will require a combination of compliance activities and performance evaluation. ERA have produced a management maturity model tool to evaluate the effectiveness. You can use performance indicators to check SMS effectiveness, and you can do safety perception surveys to provide an indicator for SMS effectiveness. And the aviation sector, because we always look to the aviation sector from the railway, because they usually they're like probably 5 to 10 years ahead of the railway sector in terms of the legislation. So the aviation sector has developed a tool for checking the overall SMS effectiveness, which is a function of both compliance and performance indicators. The aviation sector in Europe uses performance-based approach for checking SMS effectiveness. And there's three main approaches to measure SMS effectiveness: results-based, compliance-based, process-based. Each approach will result in producing the effectiveness of the SMS. So you can see there's a wide variety of views on how to check the effectiveness of an SMS is. And it's up to the NSA to decide what approach to use. And then to do, I also had to check about that a safety perception survey can be used to check for safety culture of an organization, which is linked to checking the effectiveness. So ERA have produced their own safety model, which we can use. The aviation sector has related study claims to have developed a tool to measure safety culture. So it's like the surveys and interviews were used to assess the safety culture of a railway maintenance organization. This one was actually from the paper produced. This was one of the most had a very good outcome for that railway organization. They got like again, the company had to get independent experts to do with safety culture into the organization. They wouldn't have to, and these were typically psychologists they employ. And then they produced a whole survey, and they had to get like the management on board. They had to get the unions involved to make sure that nothing was changed from the views. They wanted to make it all anonymous, so nobody, no blame game, because a lot of blame game goes on in organizations, and typically they point the finger at the frontline staff. So there was a lot of trust came out of this study and it was very actually they welcomed the organization being to do another survey after they completed the first one. So that was a very positive result. And then there was another study reviewed safety using maturity models for an organizational safety culture assessment, and found results to be inconclusive for reliability, validity, and robustness. So the European agency has developed their own maturity model. So this study actually doesn't make their model look very positive. And then I also looked at finding any studies on railway investigation reports identifying the factors of the CSM criteria that was related to causes of accidents. And I found 3 papers and they all correlated. The most problematic areas of the SMS was risk management, which is CSM criteria A, and competence management, which is CSM criteria N. And then just to go quickly through the data analysis, the review involved 60 NSA supervision audits completed in the period of 2012 to 2019. There was 60 audits generated 500 audit outcomes or recommendations, which had to be reviewed and classified. So again, there's the criteria that's there, and then I classified them into according to each subclause as well. And so this was my results table, and there were 6 organizations involved. I had to just anonymize their names, of course, and but they're all based in Ireland, you know. So anyone probably with the insight could possibly work this out, but I just had to anonymize them as best I could. So and you can see here the different percentages of outcomes. So you can see just on the right hand side, you can see certain organizations have a lot of outcomes, and they're typically the organizations which we consider the most risk adverse, and so we would audit them a lot more than other organizations. And then so this gives you a better shot, a screen view of the criteria and the number of outcomes that were assigned against the different parts of the SMS criteria, and they are the 6 organizations. So when you compile these all together to get a holistic view, this is the view you get, and you get a summary then of where all the weaknesses in the SMS are being generated from. So N is competence management, and A is risk management. And competence management, of course, has links to human and organizational factors. And of course, when they were in this period of time, human and organizational factors didn't have to be part of your SMS. So it'd be very interesting to see how things progress going forward, and what will be in the next period of time. So and then in summary then of the data analysis, there was as I say, end competence management came up to be the highest amount of weaknesses, the SMS risk management, followed by the other subsections there. And then also this analysis could also satisfy a regulation that was pointed at the NSA. We have a new regulation, and this research could provide an input to that. So just going through the main findings, the aim, again, just to remind you, was to provide recommendations to enhance the NSA planning process for monitoring a railway organizational safety management system. So just go through the first objective was to give an overview of the impact of the NSA activities and the introduction of the new CSM criteria. So the findings, the NSA being a small organization has limited resources and competence and will have to review its new tasks in the context of additional workload arising from the CSN regulations covering SMS effectiveness, safety culture, human workplace factors, and a risk-based planning approach will be required. The NSA will have to provide additional training and procedures for staff to possibly guidelines for the railway sector, evaluating the SMS effectiveness of a railway organization using possibly the ERA tool, because most likely an NSA that hasn't got the time will probably just use the tool that's being developed. And I found from research of speaking to other NSAs across Europe, and they said the tool isn't very good, so they're not using it. So I said, what are they using? And they said they don't know. And so, and then the assessment and supervision of safety culture and human organizational factors in a railway organization. We possibly will have to produce some procedures for that, or what we can do is we can adopt guidelines produced by ERA, because they produce very good guidelines. So the recommendations that the NSA should develop a new strategy and plan to address these new CSM regulations for NSA supervision to ensure they can meet the requirements. Now, it was not feasible in the time required for this study to research published papers on how HOF is integrated as part of the SMS. However, ERA has produced guidance on the HOF for the railway sector, which will be shown in later slides. So is there a broadly accepted approach to measure, indicate if an SMS is effective? The differing views were found in this. And also could be, there's different approaches to measure, indicate if an SMS is effective, are only beginning to be used in the railway sector, apart from the UK. They've developed a risk management maturity model since 2011, and they're on their third version, and they seem to be very happy with their model. ERA, as I say, developed their own model, but I found that only 2 out of 27 EU member states were using it, and I don't know what the others are using, but they have to use something to check for SMS effectiveness. And then the NSA should, the recommendation of the NSA here in Ireland is to should implement the ERA tool and try it out. And if it doesn't work out, the NSA should then be aware you can go down the route of using a safety perception survey that can be used to check SMS effectiveness. But again, you'd probably have to get not engineers, you need psychologists probably to do this work. Okay, and then the other objective was to review current practices and studies linking SMS with safety culture. The author found differing approaches to assess safety culture in organizations. From the limited published literature, found a safety culture assessment using a safety perception survey using independent specialists indicated a favorable result. So I would recommend then that a safety perception survey is facilitated and implemented by the NSA to assess the safety culture of an organization's SMS. And the NSA is appropriately independent of the railway organization to do the survey analysis. And that's very important when you're doing these surveys, that you have to be an independent organization. Okay, and the objective 2 was then to undertake a data analysis of the NSA outcomes from the audit reports. So the data analysis of NSA audit reports found criteria N, competence management, and A, risk management, to have the highest quantities of non-compliance and action required outcomes associated with them. 3 studies I found during the literature review had reviewed safety investigation reports, and they linked the causations to factors or elements of the SMS. These studies found competence management and risk management were the most problematic areas of the SMS. So if you join the dots, then that's quite interesting, because if you have an accident, but an accident is the main event in the middle of your picture. So before an accident, if you're audited by the NSA, we found the competence management and risk management are the weaknesses in the SMS. And now, after the accident has occurred, these published papers found that competence management and risk management were the most problematic areas of the they found after the cause of the accident. So I think it highlights for all bodies in the railway sector to focus on these 2 areas of the SMS. Okay, and then the recommendation was also to focus on, if you're going to apply a risk-based approach, focus on these areas of the SMS initially and audit them over the period of the railway certification or authorization. All right. And then the last part of my objective for the research was that the findings methodology devised by this data analysis, they will partly satisfy and use CSM 2018 regulation. This regulation, just one of the inputs for risk-based analysis is reviewing audit outcomes, but there's many other inputs that have to be done as well. So, and they should utilize the work of this study for their supervision strategy and plan. Okay, and the second part of the study then was to do with new requirements for human and organizational factors to be part of the railway organization's SMS that will assess the NSA, that the NSA will for railways will assess and supervise. So here's the previous SMS wheel developed by IHFES in 2012, and then this is the new model. So IHFES new SMS wheel, they added safety culture and HOF requirements, human and organizational factors requirements. So you can see safety culture is at the heart of the organization. So that's expected to be driven by leadership, while human and organizational factors is all around the organization. And that feeds into different sections of the SMS in operations, performance evaluation, and improvement. And so just to let you know that this is enforced since the transposition of the Railway Safety Directive in 2016, 798, into IHFES legislation, SI 476 of 2020. So it only came into effect in 2020, even though you think the regulation is 2016, it does take a long time for these directives to come into Irish law. And that's the normal sort of process. And these new SMS, the new SMS requirements then are found in regulation 2018-762. So just to give you, this is the text from the legislation 762. You can see that on the top part is about safety culture. So the leadership has to promote safety culture. They have to have a strategy for safety culture. And then with regard to human and organizational factors under risk assessment, the organization shall identify and analyze all operation or organization technical risks relative to the character and extent of the operations carried out by the organization. As such, risks shall include those arising from human and organizational factors such as workload, job design, fatigue, suitability of procedures. It's very detailed, but it's in there now. And then there's a whole section on the integration of human and organizational factors. The organizations will demonstrate a systematic approach for integrating human and organizational factors within the safety management system. And this includes a strategy. So these are things they must do. They can't get out of it. And if they haven't got resources in-house, they're going to have to get them out and contract them in to do this work. So the IHFES SMS guidance, IHFES have produced this new guidance document to do with the safety management system requirements for the new regulations. And these are the regulatory requirements they discuss on risk assessment that to do with human and organizational factors, and the section of 4.6 human and organizational factors. So these regulatory requirements, and they're all explained in this book. And typically they give examples of evidence. So if I was coming along and check these organizations, this is the sort of evidence that they would have to produce. So they would have to have a copy of the human and organizational factors strategy, which details how the use of human and organizational factors expertise and techniques are taken into account. They have to have a safety apology that would refer to human and organizational factors strategy. They'd have to have a risk analysis, which identifies all human and organizational factors and performance influencing factors that will impact railway safety, and the safety management activities needed to control identified risks. They have to have human factors methods, task analysis, usability analysis are used as input into design, structure, and content of procedures, and full-scale simulations involving current operation staff to optimize procedures. And then also there's going to be improvement process, including accident investigation, include the analysis of human and organizational factors. So you can see there's a lot there for them to get their head around and to get working on. And you know, they're probably when they saw this, I'm sure it's a big thing to take on board. But Irish Rail have done have employed now human factors experts, and they've also employed, they have about several staff now in their department full time. So it's great to see, but that's just for their organization. So, but hopefully that expertise will filter out to the whole railway sector in Ireland, and people will, because the word will get out, and people will go to them probably to look for help. Then under the ERA website, you can find it easily. They have produced a HOF guidance, they call it, and there's lots and lots of information there and it's for the regulators, as for the sector as well to look at. So you can go onto it yourself. It's freely available, and they even explain here why is HOF so important for safety. And you can see the whole. This is like the history of sort of like of the development of safety engineering. So it started off in the 60s and 1960s and 1980s. It was to do with process safety engineering, but then there was accidents in industry. You probably have heard of nuclear accidents. There could be, you might know the one, Three Mile Island in America. A whole load of, just a perfect example of human factors just not taken account into these processes. And then they developed safety management systems. You probably know, like, because you probably heard of other accidents. Typically, that's how the whole system developed. It was through accidents, through terrible accidents. Oh yeah. Okay, and then the last part was the integration of human and organizational factors into the systems. And then this is just to show you just the legislation framework for that mentions human and organizational factors. So and they're all the sections of the extracts from the legal framework. And then just to show you, here's the industry here. It would be laid out like this. You have OUs, which are railway undertakings, and they're the train operators. And the IM is the infrastructure manager. And you can see the railway safety directives legislation, safety methods, and how it applies to your organization. And then the NSA has legislation that applies to its organization. And then the third part on the right is the National Investigation Body. That's another body in Ireland called the Railway Accident Investigation Unit, and they have legal requirements, and they have now got human and organizational factors in accident investigation, which is great to see. And this is the structure of their report, just a section on human factors, and you can see it's very detailed on all the parts related to human factors that they now must describe in their reports when they're doing investigations. So it's great to see this. And also the organizations then will probably look at this and develop this in their own investigations internally within the OUs and IM in Ireland. And then Europe have also produced this digital platform called HOF. It's a very, very good, if you want to have a look at it, it's freely available. There's the website there. It was done by, a lot of the work here was done by a lot of experts in human factors, put all their knowledge together, and it's to raise the importance of HOF. And you can see here there's loads of information on it, and especially for the railway sector, they've on the right hand side, HOF in practice is very useful. You've got HOF in SPADs, which are signals past the danger, cab design, maintenance work, traffic management, alarm design. It's very, very useful stuff, and it's a very good resource. If you want to have a look at it, there's papers and stuff in there. And then they organize conferences and stuff as well that are free to attend. Okay, and thank you for your time. That's it.
Very much. So, is there any questions from the audience? We do the okay. So now we are going to thank you very much. We're going to go to John's presentation. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
What it has in common, maybe open, yeah, I put it just different numbers. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, 2 seconds.
Okay. So, Joan, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Shane, for a lovely presentation. That was really interesting and really enjoyed it. So today I'm just going to give a short presentation from a regulatory perspective on the approach to protecting human factors. And the title is around human factors at the sharp end. And I think as human factors practitioners, we're all familiar with what James Reason has described as the sharp and the blunt end. And, you know, it's a spectrum really, or a continuum there. And we can talk a little bit about that. But before I start, first I want to say thank you to the community of people in the Irish Human Factors and Economic Society for supporting some promotion and safety promotion around vulnerable workers. And I know since I joined the Health and Safety Authority, we're really trying to forge links between the regulator, the authority, and the human factors community, and I'm very grateful for that. I also want to introduce some colleagues that have joined me. I have 3 colleagues from the Health and Safety Authority. They might stand up. So firstly, I'm a member of, we have a vulnerable workers working group, which I chair at the authority, and two members of this working group are here with me. Firstly, Cahill Butler, who is the senior inspector and the one and only senior inspector in human factors with the authority. Also Alex Short, who works with me in occupational health and leads out in some education programs, and is also involved in research around safety representatives. And Margaret Carlton, who works as inspector in the space of occupational hygiene. So thank you for joining me, and we really want to encourage links between the authority and practitioners. So I'll move forward. So this presentation should give you a feel for our overall approach to vulnerable workers. It's a space that we've been moving into over the last few years and are increasingly working in. But I hope by the end of it, you should have an idea of who they are, where they are, what our approach is, and some resources and supports that we have for vulnerable workers. But as this is a structured presentation, I'll start with some opening comments and some statistics around vulnerable workers. And we look a bit about the strategy, both at a European level and a national level for protecting vulnerable workers. And then I'll spend some time looking at defining vulnerability and understanding it more generally, and the approach that we've been taking over the last few years. And reporting and safety culture and a number of things that Shane mentioned are hugely important. We might have a little spotlight on that. So I'll move to codify a little bit about our approach, and then say a little bit about the supports and resources, which is an emerging area for us. So I couldn't resist a little bit of James Reason to start off when we had the title of human factors at the sharp end. So we all know why we're here. We're human factors practitioners, and we're interested in the interaction between people and systems. And certainly from my approach to human factors, has always been around kind of socio-technical systems design and looking at accident causation and error from that perspective. But it is a focus on people. So whatever about looking at the system, people, and certainly within the Health and Safety Authority, and with Cahill joining us, it's very much a human factors, a people focus. And this is what brings us to vulnerable workers and understanding, well, what is vulnerability and what makes people vulnerable? And we know there's a little bit about some personal factors and work factors that can contribute to vulnerability, and looking at risk factors. And human factors is all about identifying those risk factors for unsafe events or accidents, or we work in occupational health, so also for illness. So where does this leave the sharp end and the blunt end? And that's really what we need to get our heads around. And before I move to how James Reason and how at the authority we look at this, I have a little segue into William Butler Yeats. So when I was doing my leaving cert, so any of you who've been through the Irish school system, you may have come across Yeats, which you have, and he has a lovely poem among school children. And in it, he asks, how can we tell the dancer from the dance? So before I ever did human factors, so this was stuck in English leaving cert class. So this is brilliant because it's one piece, the dancer in the dance, and it's used. He was talking about performance and creativity. But I always think when I started into the space of human factors, I thought it was really, really relevant, particularly when you look at the system, because where is performance and where is performance and where is the system and where is what is designed? And if you look at the sharp and the blunt end, you see in this picture here, you see that kind of spectrum. Now, at the Health and Safety Authority, we work at different ends. So we have, in terms of the enforcement piece, we do inspections. So we inspect at the sharp end. But we also look at safety statements and risk assessments and the design of training, which in principle is at the blunt end. Okay, so we move across this continuum. But we do know that latent failures are at the blunt end. So we know that. And that it is socio-technical, so we need to know what sits behind this. And really what we try to focus on is prevention, promotion and protection. So this piece that I'm giving today is really around the safety promotion and speaking to what we're doing. I will mention a little bit about inspection, but it's really largely in the education and promotion space. So in terms of the strategy for vulnerable workers, the EU Strategic Framework on Health and Safety in Work, which was published in 2021, it looked at workforce changes and demographic transitions and profiling, the growth in terms of migrant workers. The European Agency for Safety and Health and Work, which would be our parent agency, I think you might be familiar with the Vision Zero approach. So this is no accidents, and they have called out protecting vulnerable workers. We ourselves, we have our current, we're in the last year of our current strategy cycle, so from 22 to 2024, and we have called out vulnerable workers, or we call it out in that, and migrant workers in particular. And we're in our last year coming into 2024, and then we'll have a further strategy cycle, and we'll learn from what we've done and what has worked, and working as a tripartite organisation with government, with social partners, and with business representation groups. So there was 9,070 non-fatal injuries reported to the Health and Safety Authority in 2022. So just recently, over a month ago, we published our annual review of workplace injuries, illnesses and fatalities. And there were 28 work-related fatalities. And I encourage you to look at that, and you'll see through the different NACE codes, the sectors which tend to have more or less accidents, and healthcare and construction and agriculture tend to be up there. We also each year are involved in the Health and Occupational Research Tour, which is produced by the University of Manchester, and this reports on work-related ill health, and there's 4 different databases or sets of reporting that fits into that around occupational illness. So do look at that. But what I want to present you now, before I frame what we're doing in vulnerable work, is just to look at the Health and Safety Authority's incident data. It's a 10-year trend, so it's from 2013 to 2022. And just to kind of frame what we know about vulnerable workers. But the first thing is just to start with gender. So male workers account for 95% of the fatalities over the past 10 years, but they represent 53% of the workforce. Self-employed workers account for 43% of the fatalities over the past 10 years, but they account for approximately 15% of the workforce. Non-nationals represent 20% of all non-fatal injuries, but that's a similar proportion in terms of workforce participation. So you'll know from the census that we have approximately 12.5% of our population are non-nationals, but in terms of our workforce, it's much higher. So it's closer, when we have seasonal adjustments, it's closer to 20%. We have some interesting findings around older workers. So workers over the ages of 35 years are almost twice as likely to experience a workplace non-fatal injury. So it's really an accident at different levels of severity. It's just not a fatal accident than younger workers. And then we're looking at those workers who are over 65 years of age, they're 3 times more likely to experience a workplace fatality. So this is our 10-year trend from our incident data. I just want to point one huge caveat. So we have to look at the quality of our evidence and the reporting picture. So this is based on what is reported to us. So employers are responsible to report, accidents in work and obviously fatal accidents. But we know that there is, from our conversations with stakeholders and different interested groups, that there is underreporting for vulnerable workers. So that for different reasons, they're not necessarily reporting, and maybe sometimes their employers aren't encouraging them to report. And we know when we compare different sets of data, we know that there's underreporting for sectors with a high proportion of small businesses. Okay, so that includes retail and some hospitality. I just want to draw your attention to one thing. So we really are trying at the moment to look under the hood of the data. So vulnerable workers, and I'll explain a little bit more in the definition around younger workers, but it includes younger workers. So if we look at younger workers in accommodation and food services, and sort of the trend there, so what's highlighted in orange. So if we just look at within the NACE code, if we look down a level and we look at food and beverage services, we see that approximately 19.5% of non-fatal accidents were workers between the age of 18 and 24. But if we go further into the data and we just look at those workers working in beverages, so working in pubs, okay, and bars, 36% of non-fatal accidents were workers between 18 and 24. So, depending on what data you're looking at, the level of detail, you can get different pictures in terms of, the prevalence of injury and accidents for different cohorts. So, who are vulnerable workers? Well, there's no single European definition of vulnerable workers. And for 2 years ago, the authority embarked on a whole evaluation of different definitions. And we decided at the end of 2022 to adopt the European Agency for Safety and Health definition. And I'll just call this out. So it's certain groups of workers or people who may be more at risk from occupational accidents or ill health than others, are those that have special considerations that may need to be taken into account in a health and safety context. Okay, so that's the definition that we have adopted. It's very broad. And in that definition, we all are vulnerable workers. It makes everyone a vulnerable worker in one sense. And, so what we're trying to do is practically understand this in a bit more detail and look at the data that we have and look at the prevalence of injury and look at it from a risk perspective. So we understand, and from looking at our data and from looking at the evidence and looking at some studies in this space, that a worker can have, or a person, several different vulnerabilities. And these are linked to different personal and job factors. And I'll explain that in a second. But a very important thing to understand is that workers can become vulnerable before they start work, early in their career, late in their career. So you can become vulnerable during your working life. So you just don't start as a vulnerable worker and stay like that. It's a dynamic situation for everyone. And all workers, so all of us in this room, if we're working, we reflect a spectrum of vulnerability. So it's around saturation. Some workers have higher or lower levels of vulnerability. So just some examples. The first 3 in red, just you may know from the general regulations in 2007, they're defined as sensitive risk groups, and they tend to get more attention because there's a sort of a legislation that links into them. So young people at work, new and expectant mothers, night and shift workers. But it also includes older workers, workers who are new to the job, migrant workers, gig and platform workers, agency and temporary workers, workers with disabilities, workers with underlying health issues, lone workers, workers with low qualifications, and workers for whom English is not their first language. So just to kind of put a kind of an umbrella framework for this. So vulnerable workers, in terms of the legislation, it does include sensitive risk groups, but it's 7 sensitive risk groups plus. And it's these other groups, other vulnerable workers, as I've mentioned. So when we look at this, we're saying, well, vulnerable workers are more susceptible to injury or ill health because of specific personal or job factors. So the personal factors include biological, social, and cultural characteristics, and the job factors are associated with, the person's status in the enterprise and their work contract, with the type of work, and also with organizational factors. And it's a combination of these personal and job factors that can lead to different risk factors. And it's these risk factors that increase the probability or increase the chance of occupational illness or injury. So we need to start going behind, well, what are these personal and job factors, and how do they create these risk factors? So we leave this presentation with you, but there's a number of different personal factors. They apply to individuals and group. It can be age, gender, health, disability, sexual orientation, migration factors, race, nationality, language, a number of different personal factors. Work factors, as I've mentioned, there's decomposition we've done. We look at contract, the type of contract and person status in the organization. So, you know, are you doing part or full-time work? Are you job sharing? Have you protections in terms of sick leave, holiday and sick pay? Your employment type, is it permanent? Is it, you know, a fixed term? Is it contract work? The work, is it skilled or unskilled? Your working hours, working conditions, is it shift work? Is it night work? Is it platform work? Is it remote work? And then certain organizational factors. So looking at the safety culture, the OSH policies and procedures, the business model, training, company size. So it's these combination of these personal and job factors that create certain risk factors. So these risk factors are, if you like, you know, are what gives the kind of increased risk of exposure to occupational illness or injury. So lack of experience or newness to the job, poor safety awareness, it could be stress, lone working, presenteeism. Presenteeism is often an issue for people who are on contract work and gig workers. You know, there isn't protection, so they may show to work. Fatigue and overwork, if you're doing a lot of repetitive work, poor mental health, social isolation, lone work. There's, you know, bullying, harassment, violence and aggression also associated with lone work occasionally. So these different risk factors. So just to call out young workers, just so we're aware, young workers are those who've reached 16 years, but are less than 18 years. In terms of the most recent Q3 of the labour force survey that the ESO have, the CSO have, it's 28.4% work participation. If you look at the 15 to 24 years, which they call the youth employment rate, that's at 48% participation. But they tend to have poor safety awareness, lack of training, may not be familiar with procedures, and high workload. Migrant workers. So a migrant is a person who's engaged or has been engaged in remunerated activity in a state of which he is not a national, or he or she is not a national. Seasonal workers are also considered short-term migrants. And when we look at the CSO data and labour participation, we can see that it can vary at different quarters. So when you do look at those labour force surveys, for some migrant workers, language barriers can make accessing information about their rights and safe working practices more difficult. So there could be a safety box, toolbox talk, but it may be in English, and that may not be readily accessible. Or the migrant worker may have a reasonable level of English, but there might be literacy issues, or there could be in terms of how the information is communicated to them. But one thing to be aware of is that many migrant workers from outside the EU, they're employed under the European permit system, and that can make it difficult to speak out about unsafe work practices because they're depending on their employer to renew this permit. So there's a conflict potentially there. I think we're all aware of gig workers, and certainly when looking at vulnerable workers, there's been a lot of attention at a EU and a national level at gig workers. So a gig worker is a person who works in the gig economy. We also would have known them before this term has become part of our lexicon. We'd know them as a freelancer or as an independent contractor. So typically gig work covers on-demand work. It's short-term. It can include informal working relationships. So delivered on a task-by-task basis. The gig economy is a situation where a person, so that person being a gig worker, is hired through an app or a website to undertake a role for a third party. In our courts in the last month, there was a case for Domino's workers and looking at their whether they counted as employees. This was for tax purposes, but it has implications in terms of the ruling because they counted as employees. So one of the things is looking at the app or the website and the algorithmic management of gig workers. And there is a new EU platform work directive which looks at this. I'd encourage you to look at that. But we find vulnerable workers in all sectors and business types and different business sizes. So migrant workers often in healthcare and construction, younger workers in hospitality and retail, gig workers in logistics, and agency and temporary workers also in healthcare and construction. So the Safety and Health and Safety and Welfare Work Act requires an employer to assess the risk to safety and health for all workers to avoid workplace accidents and injury and ill health. So this applies to all workers, part-time, casual workers, migrant workers. There's no difference. Those protections apply. We have codes of practice for particular sectors. I would encourage you to look at those. But one thing just to raise is in terms of vulnerable workers and reporting, in terms of duties, the duties that an employer has, they're legally obliged to report injury for an employee arising from an accident while at work. And this is in our 2016 regulations. We know that there's underreporting for vulnerable workers and that these workers may not be aware of their rights, or if they are aware of their rights, they may be reluctant to report health and safety incidents or accidents, never mind near misses, because they fear they may lose their job. So really we should be encouraging employers to promote reporting for vulnerable workers, and we're really trying to make employees aware of this. And induction training should highlight the importance of reporting. So in terms of just close with this, our overall approach, our strategy cycle, our last one mentioned vulnerable workers and included migrant workers, and our next strategy cycle will go into more detail there. So at the moment, we're really focused on awareness raising and developing tools and supports. We're moving into a lot more stakeholder mapping. I mentioned we're a tripartite agency and working with stakeholders to engage with them to understand, the issues for different vulnerable workers and particularly workers that are hard to reach, and looking at the data to see, well, what are the particular problems in different sectors and what are the needs and what interventions will work, and looking at certain target sectors. We do this with in mind our role. We're a regulator, and in terms of the enforcement piece, the acts, these linked to it. So risk assessment and consultation and safety representation is called out in the act. So we would encourage this. Reporting is obviously called out in the general applications, but more generally, and the kinds of human factors best practices. So this goes beyond enforcement and compliance, but encouraging, the use of PPE, looking at culture, look at training, and looking at supervision. So we have a ton of supports. We have a new course coming online actually today called Protecting Vulnerable Workers on our platform, HSA Learning. We have a new topic page on our website. So if you go into our website, you'll see a topic page, a series of topics. There's a topic page there and an information sheet. So it'll be live in January 2024. We've courses on HSA Learning for young workers, for migrant workers. This year we had courses for workers who'd come from the Ukraine and displaced persons. We have information sheets on night workers and shift workers. So we have a lot of resources that we would encourage you to look at. And then we have a range of tools. We have Be Smart, we have Work Positive. You can always approach our call center. We have a lot of resources that you can make use of. So just to conclude, every worker has the right to a safe workplace where the risk to their health and safety are properly controlled. Some workers are more vulnerable, as I mentioned, due to a variety of personal and job factors. So it's very important that employers and workers themselves recognise these vulnerabilities and take steps to protect them. We have tools and supports. Our next strategy cycle is looking at this in more detail, and we really want to promote responsible work. So looking at, both this issue from the perspective of people and society, from an ecological perspective, looking at the planet, and also in terms of profitability and the economies here, in terms of the benefits of protecting vulnerable workers and the cost model behind that. So really to consider prevention and promotion and protection. And that's it. I have to say that was in 23 minutes. My personal record.
Thank you, Joan.
Okay, let's do it.
Yeah, so if now we are going into the questions and answers session. So if someone from the online audience wants to ask a question, now is the time. If you want to open your microphone or type your question in the chat.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
While we wait for them for the audience remotely, can I just say it was interesting for us to see how proactive the regulators were in respect to. So we got these two presenters because it's an example of how proactive the regulator seems to be in respect to human and organizational factors, and this for us is good news.
Yeah,
in a way.
I'm
Now,
sure it
we have
is.
questions about, for instance, I start with briefly answer one question. So I know that you mentioned safety culture and the need for assessing safety culture for the railway industry in Ireland, and how you guys might promote the ERA approach towards assessing safety culture. But again, it goes beyond regulation, so you cannot inspect them in relation to how they assess their safety culture. Just in the fact that they assess it, or how would that work for you? In the sense of when you approach them and you say, how are you tackling, how are you assessing your safety management system, and how are you assessing your safety culture? How, what is the thin line there you're working on?
Well, a lot of the regulations, they're always like what you must do. It doesn't tell you how to do it. So it is a problem, because you could have 10 organizations and they could have 10 different ways of doing safety culture, or 10 different ways to want to do human factors. So it's all up to them how to do it. But once it's done by experts, we could ask for the qualifications for the people they're using to do the work, to get a background, to know that they're not just making this stuff up, but it's going to safety culture is a very slow process to change culture in any organization. So and we have to acknowledge that as well. And we do have from the regulators' point of view, we do have very good guidance now from ERA, because the guidance gives you examples of what to accept as evidence that they're complying with the regulation. And you have to be very reasonable and proportionate with the organizations you're dealing with all the time.
Think for you, Joan,
Well, it will.
It's fascinating, Shane, because you're recommending that as an independent, that you go in and assess the safety culture. Like, how would you feel about that, Joan, if the HSA were to do that?
So I suppose when inspectors go in, it goes what they're looking at goes back to what's in the Act. And the Act doesn't call out safety culture. The actual question sections will ask about maybe safety consultation, which can be an indicator of safety culture, but it's not asking what's the quality of the safety culture. So some of these kind of human factors, established human factors concepts, and safety culture is certainly something we would promote. They exist maybe at the level of best practice, but when it comes to enforcement and compliance, they're not codified in that, and that is a challenge. Now our inspectors will always have a conversation, and they'll also talk with safety reps, and these kinds of things, may come up in the conversation, but it wouldn't often get reported. We know that safety culture is very important. So when we promote safety and good practices, we'll talk about safety culture. When we inspect, there's no questions asked about safety culture, it may come up, but it won't be a direct question. It's not something that's a yes, no to safety culture. Have you met a standard,
What about the identification of vulnerable workers?
So for vulnerable workers, so we're the identification and the definition, as I mentioned, we're using. So we've adopted the European Agency for Safety and Health at Work's definition, and it's very broad. So what we're doing is we're looking at our data, and we're looking at available evidence and working with partners to understand where do we need to look in more detail. And I suppose inspection processes will be aligned with those risk areas. And one of the problems is that vulnerable workers are everywhere. So if we know a sector that we look at very closely is construction, and we know that there's there's a high accident rate and also fatalities in construction, and we also know that there's a lot of migrant workers, approximately around 12.5% in construction. But so when we look in, so we know then that we need to look closely at the data that we're getting and seeing, is this warrant further attention? But that's a work in progress, and we're learning and doing that, and looking at available sources of evidence. And we don't have conclusive, findings there, and not all that we would share. But we're using the data to be smart in terms of our inspection process.
There's more questions from the hands up. Go for it.
I have a question for Shane.
Yeah.
Shane, that was a very interesting presentation. I've got a lot of different factor knowledge, but nothing about rare.
Okay.
So excuse me if I get it wrong. I was very interested in, you had the regulations or whatever it was from A to Z.
Yeah.
And stopped at S. And below that was infrastructure, design, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, one of the things I think is that unless you design your systems, and not just infrastructure, your systems correctly, all the other stuff isn't going to work correctly, in my view. And one of the things that kind of not surprised me a bit from the European agency was they're talking about HOF, human and organization factors, socio-technical system, technical designer, and some time ago in manufacturing, many years ago, digital equipment, if you remember when you go people involved in a system called HITOP, higher information technology and organization people. And I think we're in trouble if we don't consider the technology or the design of the systems in the same way as you described it. I suppose assessment of the operating processes. How do you think that?
It's sort of a like it's very hard for the railway to remember they come from a position where they are, you know, they're just given, you know, when they want to buy stuff, equipment, it's just like a lot of it they didn't probably, you know, have human factor involvement at all. It's only the latest, the new stuff that they're getting that they would then definitely have human factors involvement in. So like you know, for example, Irish Rail have put an order there to order new trains for the Dublin area, and they're all now, they have a full suite of people involved, human factors people, and they're going over to France to get involved in the cab layout, design of where the switches and buttons are. So it's great they're doing that now. It's very hard to go retrospectively go back and fix assets and stuff that they use all the time. So but
You've got to start somewhere, that's the problem.
exactly, they have to start somewhere, exactly, yeah. So but the good thing is they have a whole team of people employed full-time in human factors now in Irish Rail, and they're very lucky. They've got great resources, and so they've just got to get on with it. It's going to take time to make changes to all different parts of their organization. So they're building a new National Train Control Center in Houston Station, and they're getting the top-notch gears going in there, and they're getting all human factors people involved in the layout of the stations and workstations, the staff. So they're all doing that, using that human machine interface assessments, workplace assessments, and all that stuff is very good. But there's one area which is difficult, is when there's an accident and they have to get human factors involved. It's the process to follow for that. What methodology would be a good idea to use? And there is a human factors HFACS, it's called, and there a lot of people said that's a very cumbersome system to use for accident investigation. So they're trying to look at is there something more simpler to use?
Can I just second comment on that? I mean, what you described, if you look at biomedical devices and there's a thing HF75, it's really only around the last 7 or 8 years. Before that, there's no human factors. And if you look at healthcare, there's no real integration, particularly in HSE by equipment. There's no real integration of human factors and the system is big.
Okay.
At least that's my view. The last question, you talked about our European collaborations, which are great. And then you said that the UK had been, maybe they're 10, 15 years ahead of us. The UK, I'm going to bring up Brexit, of course. They're gone, they've left the EU. For me, I was at John Wilson's conference, was on human factors and way 15, 20 years ago. Fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, is there kind of a deficit for us that can we collaborate now with the UK on all of these issues, or the UK side? Oh
no, absolutely. There's huge collaboration going on between the UK. A lot of the regulations initially that came from Europe came from the regulators in the UK, and they're very much involved in the whole system of the separation of the infrastructure manager and the RU railway operator that we have today. So they played a huge important part in the railway regulation. But there's all these European groups that meet up, and some of them. So I know that some of the European groups kicked out the UK members, but I think they still allowed. If you want to contact them, there's no problem contacting these people. And Irish Rail have very good connections with the UK.
So it's like in the standards organization, same standard UK is doing that.
Yeah, the RSSB, the Railway Safety Standards Board, is a very good contact they have.
Just one more clarification: the Netherlands and the Germans are by no means.
Okay.
Yeah. In their,
that's not what I meant. Really, I was just talking about the UK. I was
Yeah.
possibly
The French.
just said from our point of view, there's a lot of knowledge in the UK that could be gone. That's my concern.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thank you, to say, you know.
I just want to follow up, please, you mentioned human factors and accident investigation, because we are now looking at this, the Health and Safety Authority, and Colleen will be giving, which we're really looking forward to, a lunch and learn on this subject in early 2024. Do you want to say anything about that? Because it's a really important area for the HSA, and she's developing this whole piece within the HSA.
Yeah, no, so I'm not much follow up when it comes to UK is also having worked in the same health and safety sector in the UK.
Louder, louder.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Having worked in accident investigation in the health and safety sector, you know, really challenging area in my experience, and certainly bringing any prosecution around human factors issues has, in my experience, required lots and lots of resource and lots and lots of time. I was involved recently with one which went on for 8 years, and it did culminate in a prosecution, but it took a lot of resource. But yeah, what I actually just, can I go back to so one of the reasons it is challenging is because of how little human factors, I suppose, is specifically called out in regulation. And the so I wanted to ask, from the rail perspective, what do you think were the drivers in getting, you've got lots of human factors vocabulary in the regulations now. What do you think were the drivers in getting that stage?
Well, there was working groups set up in Europe, and they got a whole bunch of people to work on these regulations. These regulations don't appear overnight. There's a number of years that go into it, and they have to get accepted by members. So they could be like 3 or 4 years in development. And at that stage, a lot of industry knows what's coming down the line. So they are getting prepared for this, for these additional regulations, requirements in human factors. So, but it's probably, they learn from other industries. Basically, they learn from high risk industries like the aviation sector. Like there was one there. You probably know about the German Air Wings disaster. That pilot. He had problems, and he was telling to his doctor, but the doctor under the local law wasn't able to tell his company that the pilot had serious issues about flying. So and that sort of thing, like where you'd have the human factors in there, people looking at all the aspects and saying, really, like we've got to change the laws. There's got to be, we've got to learn from that, and so maybe like there's lots to learn from human factors. And that's what's missing in investigations. So now there's now they made it compulsory to have a human factors element of the investigation. And I think but then again, that leads to other problems where the investigators who investigate need to have confidence in human factors as well. So
it's also where
it's a long process.
The regulatory system can get in the way of human factors in that case, in terms of the reporting process and the requirements for fitness for work. So it's actually a human factors on regulation. So there's a number of dimensions there, I think. Yeah.
Sam, I'll just come in quickly on just 2 points. So one thing is interesting, because safety management systems in aviation, and we come, some of us here, from an aviation background, emerged out of human factors. So human factors said you need to have an integrated, proper approach to managing safety. And these are the components. You do really good systems analysis, you have a really good, robust, just culture, and you have all your policies, procedures. So it's ironic now that after all that effort and work, that we have to retrofit then human factors back in. So I think that's something we need to be aware of. It's a bit strange. And then just the other thing, Colleen, in Ireland, in the Irish health system now, they have totally revised the incident, and it's not called investigation anymore, it's incident review process. And it's based on a human factors framework. So it was it's Rebecca Lawton and James Reason framework. It's the Yorkshire framework, and it's a systems analysis of incidents. And every reviewer in the Irish system has to do systems analysis training if you're going to be a reviewer of an incident.
But that's for operational
patient safety. It's not-
Sorry, for patient
Oh,
safety,
yeah.
it's not health and safety, yeah, it's patient
Yeah.
safety. So sorry, Sonia, you wanted to get in and just not on there, sorry.
I think what's a rolling stock still. But it's on applied to some of the legislation being a condition. The interface for the driver.
Yes.
Yeah. Can be modified, can an even be changed? Because you do have a lot of rolling stock. I mean, look at the Lewis, for example, you look at the interface there, and it seems to be very little consideration to the older vehicles.
Yeah, it is true. It's a lot of situations can happen because of an accident, and then they realize, oh, they never, there was no human factors done.
But
done.
can they even be modified?
They can be modified, but it's like anything, it's a cost. And then you're talking about the age of the asset.
Yeah.
Is it worth it? And then you have to, you're going to have to train up everybody, retrain people, and so there's huge cost to the sector.
Yeah.
So, but
it's also compulsory.
it is.
It's a question of but that one question I'm asking is the existing stock that doesn't conform to our restriction, can it be modified? Can it be changed? Can alterations be put in?
That'll be up to the industry to make that decision. It's not for the regulator to make the decision if it can be modified. They'd have to have probably.
The regulator is able to select the components so that you actually do actually conform to this, that, and the other. And whatever the kind of train authority described, it's not up to them. That happens with the case. The law dictates certain things, and the law requires certain things. The question I'm asking is, you do have a lot of old law and stuff. I mean, what have you known? Much of the
Yeah.
as you kind of mentioned in this part, you do have a lot of great. You do have a lot of passenger. You do have a lot of network services that don't conform to that legislation.
Yeah, that's right. And the industry is allowed get derogations from regulations.
It's allowed.
They can get derogations from regulations, so they don't have to apply them. So that's that's escape clause, yes, essentially, yeah.
I don't spend told.
Yeah, exactly. They can, and they could say a cost benefit analysis didn't justify it, the change.
So they would do a complete assessment on the actual cost of a full impact or that kind of full collision, and then evaluate and perhaps say, well, actually, it wasn't worth making the modifications to the interface, and we thought we'd let it roll. I'm sorry about the 200 dead in the impact. Yeah, exactly. Maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the way it can work.
As you escape clause, they have it. Are you unique to one?
No. Any country under that regulation can apply derogations. To regulations.
Yeah.
There's always derogations.
And they justify that with
Sorry, maybe we can continue with the conversation later on.
Just
have
one last
maybe
question.
one last question. Yeah.
If there's time for one last question.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So just, I'm curious about the balance, the role of the regulator and how you think the balance is between the regulator as a policeman and the regulator as a learned advisor, if you like. How do you see your role and how do you see that balance being maintained?
Well, one of our duties is to foster and encourage.
Okay.
Under the Act, so that's the number one. So we'll always, if we can, we'll go out and form working parties with the sector, and then we'll use our resources. We'll look to all the other countries across Europe, which are much bigger in size, much more dense networks, much more organizations, and they will have come across these problems before. Okay. So we'll utilize our resources.
So when you come in the door to your the organizations you're regulating and say, oh no, they're here again. quick tidy up the place, support, and they sound great, they're here again, they can help us sort this out.
Well, it's a bit of both. Yeah.
And certainly, from my own work with the Health Safety Authority, inspectors aren't always perceived as a partner that is bringing you on a journey into compliance. Now, we would perceive ourselves as doing that. There's always the enforcement piece, but it is a partnership, and we would use that term journey and supporting and helping people, and that is both during an inspection process. There's an education piece and a safety promotion piece, but then outside of the inspection process in terms of what we try to do, like today's like today, where we, you know, present on important aspects of the work and have a kind of a safety promotion kind of perspective. But we do have, you know, different, you do have to look at resources then and say, well, how far does any regulator, where are their resources? Have they more people working in inspection than in terms of education and promotion? How far are they aligned up, you know? And there's always things to improve there. But from where we are in the health and safety space and looking at our European colleagues, we are quite invested in safety promotion and education, and I'm pleased to say that. But there's always more to do, you know.
Just a clarify,
Yeah.
yeah, just one, I don't sure what's the claim, if they exempt themselves from particular legislation, you enforce on the regular stuff.
No, they have to, that has to be justified. They'd have to go to the European Railway Agency and present our case to the European Agency, and they would make decision. So it wouldn't be a decision made by us, the NSA regulator.
Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you guys so much. We've gone way over, but thank you.
Enjoy a bit of tea and coffee and the leftovers, whatever.
Mince pies.
And network even now, we have the room for another maybe half an hour, so.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Merry Christmas, all.
And thank you to our online audience.
They still there. There's people.
Yeah. Hi, welcome. June, Tony, thank you very much.
Names on
See
the
you
online.
soon, yeah?
Thank you, all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hope you enjoyed it. Bye-bye.
Right, Diego, thanks.